The clock is ticking towards polling day.
I propose to set an election date of Thursday, the 2nd of March.
In the world of politics, it's game on.
You have to ask Enda about the battle bus.
Battle lines are being drawn after the collapse of Stormont. But will the new assembly work any better than the old? Tonight, in the second of two special programmes on power sharing, we review what really may have caused the collapse of the executive last month. Can power sharing work better? And can it even be put back together after the election? This partnership was the future once. Last May, Arlene Foster and Martin McGuinness, as First and Deputy First Ministers, reaffirmed their commitment to power sharing. But 7 months later, the Fresh Start went up in smoke. Sinn Féin pulled the plug on power sharing by not renominating for the position of Deputy First Minister, following Martin McGuinness's shock resignation. He listed the Renewable Heat Incentive (RHI) scandal, among others, as the reason for his resignation.
I think anybody that knows the history of our relationships with the DUP, particularly over the course of recent years, and the different issues that have really raised all sorts of question marks about the DUP's behaviour. Things like Red Sky, Frank Cusnahan and Nama, the Leafa decision, despicable decision, the RHI. All of these things are hugely concerning for us in Sinn Féin.
Arlene Foster immediately took to social media to respond.
At a time when we are dealing with Brexit, needing to create more jobs and investing in our health and education system, Northern Ireland needs stability. But because of Sinn Féin's selfish actions, we now have instability.
Martin McGuinness, in leaving the Assembly chamber for the last time, marked the end of a decade of power sharing between the DUP and Sinn Féin. But how did it come to this? What's really going on, and what other factors may have led to the fracturing of relationships at the heart of the power-sharing executive? For the DUP, it had all been going so well.
The leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, the First Lady of Northern Ireland, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, the Right Honourable Arlene Foster, MLA.
In her party conference speech last October, Arlene Foster may have been prematurely triumphant.
Just 12 months ago, Northern Ireland was a byword for political crisis and instability. Devolution was in crisis. Stormont was teetering on the brink. Our rivals were cocky about their election chances, already measuring up their curtains for their new offices. And the pundits were yet again predicting the demise of the DUP.
John Tong is Professor of Politics at the University of Liverpool and co-author of a book on the DUP.
My thoughts at the DUP conference were Arlene Foster, First Minister until 2021 and beyond, and full steam ahead for the DUP. I thought the DUP would be governing Northern Ireland essentially in perpetuity, albeit in partnership with Sinn Féin. I think what the DUP forgot was that the whole of the Good Friday Agreement is built upon a partnership. It only takes one partner to walk away and the whole edifice collapses.
And the responsibilities that we do have in terms of education.
Dahi Mackay resigned as a Sinn Féin MLA last year after the party suspended him over claims he coached a blogger to give evidence to a Stormont inquiry. He worked alongside Arlene Foster in the Assembly.
There was a hope, I think, that she would be more modern that she was relatively younger and that she would be businesslike in how she dealt with things.
Arlene Foster's no moderate. She's a tough unionist.
She had led the party to a 38-seat win at the May elections last year, a resounding victory for the new leader.
I think the DUP, to some extent, in their celebrations of the May 2016 result, probably took their eye off the ball somewhat and didn't see the danger signs. I think the DUP miscalculated. I don't think for one moment they really thought that Sinn Féin would collapse the executive.
Whether it's in a restored assembly.
Just 10 weeks after a triumphant DUP party conference, Arlene Foster found herself out of a job as First Minister.
Arlene Foster is damaged goods by virtue of the fact that she's effectively been sacked by Martin McGuinness's resignation. So that's simply a statement of fact. She is damaged. The question for Arlene Foster is, can she ever resume as First Minister?
The Cash for Ash controversy sparked discontent in the relationship between the DUP and Sinn Féin. But the decision by a DUP minister to withdraw just before Christmas £50,000 in funding for an Irish language scheme was akin to pouring petrol on the fire.
In his two-page resignation letter, Martin McGuinness listed a catalogue of his party's grievances. But some believe Sinn Féin pulled the House down to forward their own agenda.
Sinn Féin were losing votes. That's why they decided that they wanted to re-engage with their base in this way that they've done. In the last election, it took a very significant drop, and that's why Sinn Féin has done what it's done. That's the real reason underlying it. The scandal over that heating scheme is the pretext, but the real reason is their loss of support.
There is no political institution in the world would have survived the alleged corruption we have witnessed and been witness to over this last number of months. It's not about an attempt to increase our mandate. This is about defending the principles of the Good Friday Agreement, defending the Good Friday Agreement and defending the integrity of government.
Despite John O'Dowd's assertions, some believe that the collapse of power sharing really is all about Sinn Féin.
It was Sinn Féin that became increasingly unhappy with the arrangement because the DUP, they felt that they were in the ascendancy. Sinn Féin felt that they were simply having to go with the DUP agenda.
As a former Sinn Féin insider, Dahi Mackay has an insight into the party's election strategy.
I do think that Sinn Féin now find themselves in a position where they have a political opportunity and that they can help to mobilise a dormant Republican nationalist vote that certainly exists out there.
In politics, there's always a game within a game. What do you think your former party's strategy is?
Its strategy is to go back into the executive with a stronger position. So Sinn Féin shouldn't be rushing in to restore the executive and the assembly again until they make some significant gain.
Sinn Féin's election message has been consistent.
There will be no return to the status quo.
There will be no return to the status quo.
There will be no return.
There will be no return to the status quo.
To the status quo.
It means for Sinn Féin that they're not going to go back into government as secondary to the DUP, in their view. So it means change probably on an Irish Language Act. It means change on such things as same-sex marriage. And it means a greater equality, a co-badging in many ways of First and Deputy First Minister. If Sinn Féin don't get those, then for Sinn Féin, whilst they wouldn't welcome British direct rule for obvious reasons, they may feel they have less to lose than the DUP, at least for a limited period of British direct rule. That, of course, may seem very ironic for an Irish Republican Party, but that's the current situation.
Are Republicans restless for change? On the last day of the Assembly, People Before Profit's Eamon McCann told us they are.
The structures up here in Stormont were sold to rank-and-file Republicans as an alternative path to a united Ireland. Abandon armed struggle because we have discovered a different project which will carry you forward. That was accepted by the great bulk of members of Sinn Féin and the Provisional IRA. And so the reason why Sinn Féin stayed for so long, to the frustration of many in the rank and file, to the anger of the rank and file, is that having dropped the traditional Republican idea of armed struggle until there's a united Ireland, their alternative having now collapsed. What's their next trick? What's Sinn Féin's next trick?
I think it would be foolish for Republicans to rush back in to the Assembly and the Executive. I think that Republicans continually need to review whether their strategy is going to deliver on their ultimate objective, which is a united Ireland.
The question now is, has society moved on?
Right, just going to jog down to the bottom of the field, right? And then we're going to come up right up to the top of the field.
In Keady, the Armagh Junior Camogie team is training ahead of a busy competitive season.
We're trying to get up and down the field. We're trying to get ourselves warmed up.
Many here travel to and from their jobs in Belfast for their twice-weekly training sessions.
I think this generation of girls we see out here this evening have been completely shielded from, maybe our generation when we were playing sport, and it's absolutely brilliant that they don't have, that additional worry or fear, and, absolutely it's clearly, onwards and upwards. Would be liking to think that we wouldn't go back to the dark days.
Grania Kelly is the team's joint captain.
Do you have a personal view on the situation at Stormont and on power sharing?
It's a bit rubbish. The Good Friday Agreement was that long ago now that things should really be running quite smoothly. It's nice to think that we don't have to worry about, who follows what political party, and it doesn't matter where you're from, and it would be sad to think that we would go back to that.
Do you and your peers aspire to live in a united Ireland, or are you happy to live in a Northern Ireland at peace?
I'd be happy to live in Northern Ireland at peace, as opposed to maybe live in a united Ireland that's going to cause more uproar and is going to cause more fighting and things to reoccur.
Whatever has happened to attitudes here, in the 19 years since the Good Friday Agreement, the world has moved on. In the last 10 months alone, there have been significant geopolitical shifts on both sides of the Atlantic.
Congratulations, Mr. President. The British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
Britain is distracted by Brexit, the Republic by its own political crisis, and the US by its new president. The latest Stormont crisis shows no sign of triggering major diplomatic efforts to get power sharing back on track.
And some believe that Brexit has made a very significant contribution to the fracturing of power sharing.
Brexit has been a really, really big fault line in this whole recent scene. For nationalists and Republicans, the possible resurrection of the border is getting in the way of why they signed up to the Good Friday Agreement, which is they could retain their legitimate, may disagree or agree, but it's a legitimate political objective, provided it's by the vote, not by the bomb, to achieve a united Ireland. Unionists will fight it all the way. That's a legitimate political objective for them. I think that's destabilised the situation and in turn made unionists dig in.
Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU by a majority of 56%. Sinn Féin immediately demanded a border poll.
We're calling for a border poll, of course, because we're United Irelanders.
But was quickly dismissed by Arlene Foster.
The Secretary of State has already indicated that the test has not been met to call a border poll. I suppose the call for the border poll was as predictable as the flowers in May. We knew it would come, but the test has not been met.
The Sinn Féin president has said taking Northern Ireland out of the EU will destroy the Good Friday Agreement, claiming it would be a hostile action.
Brexit poses unprecedented political, economic and diplomatic challenges to peace and prosperity on this island.
But in an interview to an online news channel, Gerry Adams also said that Brexit may offer the chance to win further political concessions.
In a way, then, Brexit is a gift for you, right? You campaigned against it, but now that it's happening, you're using it to make the case for a united Ireland.
Yeah, well, you always have to. Never waste a crisis, never waste a difficulty.
We don't believe in a scorched earth policy for creating a united Ireland. We want to build this place up. We want to, of course, integrate across the island, but we need to have Northern Ireland working as well. And I just think it's a very dangerous kind of strategy to say that let's have Brexit and that'll somehow magically bring a united Ireland.
The DUP led the Leave campaign in Northern Ireland. Some suggest that unionists who voted for Brexit may unintentionally have advanced the prospect of a united Ireland.
People are now talking to some extent seriously about a united Ireland again as a consequence of Brexit. I think the DUP had not really thought through Brexit. They hadn't really thought about the border. Very few people had thought about the border.
UUP party leader Mike Nesbitt, who campaigned to remain, warned that Brexit could lead to the breakup of the UK.
I'm not sure how deeply anybody thought about the vote, and I think what has been destabilising is the lack of response from the Northern Ireland executive to Brexit.
The politics of identity, some suggest, is at the core of much of the friction at Stormont. The result is an increasingly polarised political discourse because, according to some, the middle has been hollowed out.
This is the border between Arlene Foster and Michelle O'Neill's constituencies, the leaders of the two biggest parties in a power-sharing system that seems to leave less and less room for the middle ground of Northern Ireland politics.
There was clearly a view in governments in London and Dublin that we needed to bring in the extremes into government in order for it to work. And that's an understandable strategy, but it hasn't worked. We now don't have a government. And even when we did have a government, they didn't deliver anything. The middle ground wants to work together. The others don't.
Mike Nesbitt's recent comments that he intends to give the SDLP his second preference vote in the upcoming election sparked controversy within his party. But he's denied he made a mistake.
I think there's a middle step, and it's the one I'm calling for in this election, and that is a partnership of the willing. It's still going to be compulsory, it's still mandatory, but it's done between two parties who are doing it for a bigger and better reason.
Well, I think it's a very brave call of Mike Nesbitt to call for cross-community transfers across the divide, because it goes against all the statistical evidence in respect of cross-community transfers that we've had to date. So it would be a brave, bold new era for Northern Ireland if it happens.
If we are going to be 21st century leaders, we need to be confident enough to say, as a unionist, I am a proud unionist, the union is safe, but it will be even safer if nationalists are comfortable within Northern Ireland.
For Alliance leader Naomi Long, the common good should be the driving force for a new power-sharing executive.
Power sharing in its truest form, where it is focused on the people we serve and not self-service, ought actually to be relatively simple. There are, of course, philosophical divisions between parties, people who have different perspectives on the economy, people who have different perspectives even on moral questions, but we should be able to work through those together in terms of power sharing by being able to see the bigger picture, and that is what is in the best interests of the public that we're here to serve.
The Good Friday Agreement generation has largely grown up under devolution.
Hiya, I'm Jennifer. Nice to meet you.
I've come to meet a group of them, all politics students at Queen's.
I think we should move to an adversarial system of government where we have an official government and an official opposition, and they actually can take turns to be the government and the opposition.
Do you think that politics at Stormont is a fair reflection of society?
I think parties here, they have their strongholds and they
they know that they're safe in those strongholds, and they focus all of their efforts, all of their political will towards those strongholds. They don't try to reach out. There's no need for them to shake up their policies or to progress in any way.
Just to take a straw poll, who here thinks that power sharing is working?
Just 4 out of 12.
I think power sharing has been good. You know, we have went through a lot of problems in this country, and it has helped us to move forward as a society.
I think the kind of prevailing opinion, particularly amongst our generation, is that power sharing was great in 1998. It has brought peace, but we do need a change of the structures of government, the structures of how our politics actually works here. I think we have a serious problem with a lack of accountability within our assembly, within our government.
It seems likely fresh talks on the other side of the election will consider potential structural changes at Stormont.
We'd actually like to see a review, reform and revitalisation of the Good Friday Agreement to bring our structures up to the modern day. I think we'd have to look at, for example, voluntary coalition. I think we do need to get rid of community designation and stop dividing our society as nationalist and unionist. You know, it's about one Northern Ireland, not two divided communities. So I think we should do that, but I think we should do it in the context of a constitutional convention where we bring in citizens to have their say. It was the People's Agreement. We need to return it back to the people.
The centrepiece of the Belfast Agreement was mandatory coalition, and it's lying in tatters. I'm not opposed to voluntary coalition. That's the only way we're going to get durable, respectable, workable devolution. You have to work it on the basic democratic process that the people are those who have the discretion as to who's in government and who's out, and recognising that at its heart, voluntary, not mandatory coalition is the way to go. And if that can't be done, then this Stormont and these structures are not worth keeping because they are not delivering.
It isn't just those determined to scrap mandatory coalition who recognise it can have serious drawbacks.
I do think there are dangers in the sort of forced coalition system you have in power sharing, because it leads to a sort of stasis in government. No one's in opposition, everyone's in government. It leads to corruption, it leads to the staleness of any ideas.
This system privileges stability over almost everything else. Competence in government, accountability, all of those things come secondary. All the parties there, as long as they play the game and of the tribal tribune, the person who's coming to represent the Gael or the planter, then you come home without necessarily delivering the goods, and you can always blame the other side for the fact that you didn't get the goods.
But is Northern Ireland ready to scrap mandatory coalition in favour of majority rule?
If you can get beyond sectarian parties, then you could have majoritarianism, but we're not there yet, and we don't seem to be even moving very fast in that direction.
I don't believe in changing the mandatory coalition model that we have. I think we need to protect minorities, and that's the vehicle for doing it. We need to change how we operate in the Assembly. We need to get rid of half of the SPADs that we have. We need to curb their pay and curb their power. And I think those are kind of things that could begin to open Stormont up.
If a power-sharing executive cannot be formed after the election, a return to direct rule may supersede efforts to restore devolution.
Sinn Féin might take a gamble that direct rule will have a greener tinge to it because the British government needs the Irish government at the moment on issues relating to Brexit. And so direct rule might not be quite the same from Westminster over the next couple of years as it would normally. Direct rule is unpopular. Most people do want a devolved government in Northern Ireland, or you could have joint authority, which would be a hard sell to unionists, to put it mildly.
Until we get to the point where people stop trying each other's patience and start to be a little more gracious and perhaps a little more generous in how they operate these institutions, we will continue to find ourselves back at this juncture.
It's Saturday morning and East Belfast Football Club is playing against 18th Newton Abbey in the quarter-final of the Templeton Cup. I'm here to find out how the election pledges and political party appeals are playing with a younger generation in East Belfast.
I think Stormont is almost akin to the likes of a playground. The DUP and Sinn Féin tap into things that are actually most dearest to us in the community. They tap into our identity, they tap into, Sinn Féin are looking at Irish language. You see DUP tap into our potential anxiety but our passion for the union, but to use that to actually their own advantage, whether it's to get votes, whether it's to get popularity, whether it's ultimately, in my opinion, to get power.
Would you trust a nationalist or a Republican First Minister?
I can't seem to trust my own local or my own politicians, so it's hard to take that I'll trust somebody on the other side of the community.
It doesn't matter whether it's a Green First Minister or an Orange Street First Minister. They both have to sort of come to terms and make a decision between themselves. One can't do one without the other.
Will you vote, and what would you like to see done with your vote?
I'm not too sure personally if I will vote, just to see. It's obviously clear what's going on up there is a shambles.
Maybe it'd be better saying what I don't want to see done with my vote. I don't want to see just a continued pattern of things we've been happening for the last 20 years. Our country was so desperate to put an end to the conflict we had that we substituted a violent conflict for a political one, and the latter is far better than the former, but both of them seem equally ineffective.
Power sharing offers all the major parties a seat at the executive table, but it can't force them to agree once they get there. And of all the issues that continue to divide, none is more poisonous than the past.
Last week in her home village in County Tyrone, Michelle O'Neill attended a commemoration of 4 IRA men who were shot dead by the SAS 25 years ago.
These 4 young men that we remember tonight weren't afraid of any challenge. They faced it head on. They did so out of a desire to build a new future.
In Belfast, in a BBC studio, Arlene Foster gave her reaction.
There can be no equivalence between terrorism and those people who stood between those of us in society who were living through it, i.e. the security forces who were protecting people, and terrorists who were going out in the dark of night to murder people.
There are some who would say we have no right to remember or to honour them. We have absolutely every right.
What do you make of her attendance at that event tonight?
I mean, it is what it is, and I have to say, no surprise given her antecedents, so I'm not surprised.
The pain of victims' families is proving an insoluble problem.
You could never change what had happened for them, but the one thing that they always used to say, and I would say to them, their sacrifices helped us, you know, to work for the future. I never said that when you take the number of people who died and the number of injured, it's just short of 40,000. I never said you could deal with each of those individual cases. And I don't really feel that if you keep trying to do that, or talking about trying to do that, it's a good idea. It's not possible. It's just not possible.
From this hill in Dungannon, you are supposed to get a clear view of all of Northern Ireland and beyond, but not on a misty day. Some argue our view of the past is clouded as much by what we forget as by what we remember.
There is a bit of a problem in that a generation has now grown up that did not experience the Troubles and did not realise the problems we were dealing with, and did not realise how those problems were in fact resolved. And there are people then who are vulnerable because they don't know, and they may be fed an incorrect version of what happened. We have got to have a degree of frankness and an awareness of how we must ensure that it doesn't happen again.
The Good Friday Agreement, a peace deal based on compromise, was endorsed by a majority in Northern Ireland. But in terms of understanding and trust between communities here, it seems at times like all and nothing has changed.
I think a peace process is not a fairy story. You don't get to live happily ever after once you signed a peace agreement. So no, Northern Ireland is not suddenly a perfect and wonderful society. But you no longer have the Troubles, and I don't believe that you are going to go back to the Troubles, and that is a major gain.
After the election, all of the major parties will have to decide what compromises they might be willing to make to put power sharing back together.
If you don't get to a rapid agreement, it could go on for a very long time, and both sides will then find it very difficult to compromise.
It will be up to voters across Northern Ireland to decide who gets the opportunity to share power. Those elected will have to decide whether to sit at the table or sit it out.
And you can see a full list of candidates for the Northern Ireland Assembly election on the 2nd of March on the BBC Northern Ireland News website. That's at bbc.co.uk/newsni.